Welcome back to Getting Past the Premium, everybody, with Ryan Brott, myself. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be back, Elliot.
Yeah, we were without you for a couple episodes, but good to have you back on the show. And then with us today, we have Peter Teresi with Certificial. How you doing, Peter?
Doing well, man. Thank you.
Good. Well, I'm excited for this conversation. You guys are doing some really cool stuff in the, I'll call it InsurTech space, but what you guys are doing is pretty awesome. So I want to make sure we give your background and how you got to where you're at today and who you are. So I'll kind of let you take that piece away and walk the audience through what you guys are doing and how you got to where you're at.
All right, cool. No, I appreciate it. First, thanks for having me, guys. Really do appreciate the opportunity to speak, joining the podcast, and have access to the audience. So excited.
Absolutely.
I'll keep the background somewhat short. But I've been in insurance most of my career now, and I really am a technologist at heart. Although I've spent most of my career in insurance, I've never actually been a broker myself and sold insurance, but I've worked very closely with agencies and brokers and carriers. So. Yeah. I know enough to be dangerous, but being with a technology background, I think one of the interesting things about my career journey is that I've always kind of worked in semi-startup, small environments. So, when I started Certificial, it was very new, but not completely foreign at the same time.
Yeah.
Even again, if you go back to the beginning of my career, I started working with Microsoft, and even there, as big as Microsoft was, I was part of MSNBC when it was a joint venture. And one of the first employees, so it was a very startup feel. It was like a trailer in Fort Lee, New Jersey, to a big studio in Secaucus, New Jersey, eventually. Again, very different than your typical startup. You're being backed by Microsoft and NBC, right?
Yeah.
Versus your bank account, right? But still, a lot of the things that are necessary in order to grow teams and to grow, to create technology and do things, it's kind of been there from the beginning for me. And again, you'll find that kind of continuation throughout all of my prior roles. I worked for a company in Wall Street that got, was again 75 people got bought out by a big company, but I was there during the early days. And then, majority of my career was really spent with Accord. So although not a startup, certainly still a small org. Wearing many hats, again, a lot of things you need to do, right, as a founder and in a startup, and was responsible for standards globally. So it was really my time with Accord that allowed me to get very close to working with, actual insurance agents and brokers and carriers, and really start to see the inner workings of the insurance industry, which, looking at that through the the mindset and the view of a technologist, is always it's just endless opportunities. It's a matter of really ideas. Learning our industry and learning how it actually operates, because ideas come, there's many, right? Like it's not hard to come up with ideas when you look at insurance and you see the way certain things work. The execution and how you actually plan to implement is probably where the real skill comes in, right? That's where the real you have to understand the inner workings of our industry, because it is complex, right, wrong, or indifferent. And getting things done in insurance is not easy, right? It's a task.
Timing, right? Yeah. Product market fit
timing
is probably one of the biggest issues.
I couldn't agree more. So with Accord, I started developing some tech there, and eventually the Accord Solutions Group was created, right? And I kind of ran that as a CEO for a number of years and built some tech there, and glad to see that continuing to remain in production and some good things going on there. And from there it was just a matter of like, okay, I have worked with enough agents, brokers, and carriers at this point, and I've heard about this certificate of insurance, because again, it's one of the earlier standards that come from Accord. And so constantly hearing about the pains and the struggles inside our industry with this. And it's just one of those things that I just had some really strong ideas and thoughts on how to solve and solution. And I think when I looked at the landscape of what was happening, and the attempts that were, I would say, more like band-aids to this problem, it seemed like there was a little bit of a disconnect in truly trying to tackle this from a foundational perspective, and let's see if we can just patch it up all over the place. But it really wasn't making the process any better. And that's where Certificial kind of came to fruition. That was the vision from the beginning, was to take a different approach at this and be innovative in this space and transformative. But again, most importantly, knowing our industry, knowing how things are going to move. This is not a light switch that's going to get flipped We're not changing overnight. This is embedded, never mind in insurance, it's embedded in every vertical and every business that intersects with insurance, right? The complexity of change management control here is, one of the highest levels I've at least encountered and worked with. And so, our ability to do that had to be very thought out from the beginning, and that's, again, that's kind of the background, right?
But when did you start Certificial?
We are technically going on like, year 4 into 5 now.
Yeah. That's about what I thought.
Yeah, so we had some early prototypes in late 19. Really went into production in early 2021 with real big clients, real production, not and then it's been growth since then, which is we're proud of.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Well, one of the things that maybe I'll have you dive into what Certificial actually does quickly, because I think that's important, but want to highlight, this where we've gotten with InsurTech, right? When InsurTech first rolled out, it was like the death of the independent agent, right? And everybody wanted to displace this old industry that is, the independent agency channel, right? Go direct to the consumer. I think that's certainly we've all seen that shift. There's obviously direct to consumer InsurTechs out there. Yeah. But what I've been seeing is much more around tools being built to support the independent agency channel and to continue to allow us to build those into our model to provide more value back to the clients. And so that's where I'd be curious, to dive into what Certificial does, but then what specifically were you trying to accomplish when you started Certificial? You mentioned some of the issues with certs and what you're trying to solve, which we've all experienced, but, maybe get a little more tactical there around how you're working to solve those for the independent agency channel.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's, the view I have of this and the way we approach this is really unique. Because on one hand, it's like really what we're trying to truly solve in the end is the certificate holders problem, which is, which is really the need, right? If it wasn't for certificate holders or people needing to verify coverage, this process wouldn't exist.
Wouldn't have a problem.
Right? No one would ever create another COI again, right? Unless a cert holder asks for it, right? We're happy to get rid of this process. But but that's not the case, right? And people do have a need for this. And so if you're not really solving that end point, and there's not a true success that you can say, this is working for this end customer, then really what have you solved, right? You're maybe creating efficiencies, or maybe creating, solving some journeys. But again, if it's all for the purpose of something that doesn't have true value, then I say, what's the point? And honestly, it's one of the ways I look at COIs. I'd say if we're going to keep doing what we're doing today, the way this is being done, I question why we continue to do it. Because the amount of E&O exposure that we introduce into the insurance industry versus the amount of actual compliance a cert holder gets, I don't think the risk and reward's worth it. I don't think the time and effort's worth it. And that's why when I look at this, to me, it's a foundational change. It's flawed at a level that requires a bit of a whiteboard session. But again, knowing that we have to be able to evolve within our industry and not have a change that occurs overnight. So with that said, important to Certificial, of course, is the end customer and making sure that they're able to actually accomplish what it is that they set to do when they ask for a certificate of insurance. And you'll find as we get a little bit into our business model, we're actually funded by the risk management community. And what that really allows us to do is, when I first heard about COIs, it wasn't about the certificate holders' pain points. I learned about those later. What I learned about, certificates of insurance from agents and brokers was the operational challenges they have, the fact that they're getting, and I hear an agent say, I'm thinking of passing on a customer and not selling them insurance because they have too many COI requests and they have too many cert holders, because they're doing so much business that there's nothing left in the premiums. There's nothing left and that makes sense for me to even write this customer, that's, says something about the process, like if we're actually turning away business because of COIs and because of certain requests is interesting to me. And furthermore, think about the customer service interaction that happens there. I think we don't spend enough time when we think about COIs to realize the position an independent agent is in maintaining a good customer relationship with their client, because that COI stands between them getting paid and doing work and sometimes affects the relationship of their customer. I mean, it's a very tough spot for an independent agent to be in, you know, and if they're not able to service that right, we've got all these operational challenges inside the insurance industry that, you know, that we want to solve for that as well. And so when you look at Certificial, we are equally taking all three stakeholders equally in mind, whether it be the insurance industry, which I'll put as a stakeholder, the actual policy holder is equally, you know, thought throughout in our workflows and our applications and service, and the certificate holder. And that's one of the things that makes us unique, is that we're an end-to-end, looking at this from all three perspectives, not how do I just solve your portion of the process and your portion of the process, because all those breakpoints is what makes the process not work, right? And so, you know, so we are, you know, at the same point, very much focused on solving the insurance agent's problem. And the reason why solving the insurance industry's issues in this space is so important is that it's our belief that if you solve within the insurance industry and you innovate here, the downward benefits and effects automatically occur for the others. You almost have to spend less time solutioning for them because you solved it at the right point, the right, you know, we always say you can only catch what you're thrown. So if you think you're going to be innovative from the risk management side of the house, you know, I say good luck. This has got to come from within. This is an insurance, you know, process that comes from within the insurance industry. So the innovation has to come from within. And so that's why we start our journey there, quite honestly, when it comes to innovation and transformation, and again, push out from there. And everybody wins when you solve and you fix problems at the right level.
Such an important point.
Totally. It's a great perspective. And I love how you're hitting multiple points in, I'll say, the customer journey as it relates to verifying insurance. Yeah. But dive into a little bit, because I think it's super unique on how you guys are compensated for the product and what that means for independent agents and the independent agents' clients, right? Because I think that's, you walk through that and hit all three of those.
Sure.
But now talk about who's actually paying for the product, because this is very unique.
Yeah. And so again, you know, kind of looking at our industry and saying, all right, well, if I need to solve a problem for the cert holder ultimately, then, you know, how you know, what really, if the innovation has to come from within the insurance industry, then the way we looked at it is, well, let's empower the insurance industry. Let's give them the tools they need to actually service what the, you know, we call requesters on our system. We call, you know, cert holders requesters, just because cert holder is too form driven of a name, and we are a data driven company, and forms are a rendering of that data and that information at any point in time. So you're really a requester in our eyes at Certificial. So if I use that term requester, I am referring to the traditional cert holder. But, you know, ultimately, you know, in order to do that, you know, again, we got to empower the insurance industry. So we came up with a model that, you know, we're able to provide, you know, an excellent enterprise compliance management system to the requester communities. And they're able to use us. And again, we got legacy support in every aspect of our system, right? That's how we know how we can transform and move into this process. You know, for agents, we have print support, and for requesters, we can process COIs, all that traditional stuff that goes on today. But it's the, you know, it's the more innovative use of the system that really creates the tremendous benefits for them. So as these requesters come into the system, we're giving them a very powerful compliance management tool. We're funded in that way. That allows us to build our technology. And what we've built in the insurance industry is now an extension to both policy administration systems and agency management systems that creates an experience where, you know, we're not trying to create login fatigue here. We're trying to make it feel like you never really left your management system as much as possible, so that you have a way of working on a client. And when you go to issue COIs or respond to requests, because we're a bi-directional platform, that the insurance agencies or whoever, the CSRs, whoever's acting on behalf of that process flow, can just come into this process and very quickly respond and get these COIs out the door. So in the insurance industry, we do not charge for anything that relates to issuing COIs. So it doesn't matter who's doing it. It doesn't matter if it's the agent, the CSR teams, or even the insured, if they're enabled with self-service capabilities. Because I mentioned, I said we have a insured stakeholder profile in our system. So all of that is free, because the way we look at it is the more the network gets fed, the more data that's on the network, the more we're able to solve not only the challenges that go on inside the insurance industry, but really feed into the compliance and the risk management community data and information that makes this process valuable and worthy. So we're funded on that end to really empower the insurance industry. And that's a model we're proud of. And it's a little complex and confusing, but when you really think about it, it makes sense. It's like, could we sell things in insurance? Absolutely. I don't want to. I really don't feel like going through another sales cycle on that side. I just want to say, here's the technology. We've made it available for you. Get the benefits, and and hopefully it brings all agents and brokers value.
Yeah, well, absolutely. What I love about that is what you mentioned at the start. You really wouldn't have this process if somebody didn't need to verify insurance coverage, right? So if the reason that we have to produce a certificate is because somebody wants to verify insurance coverage, that person, that end user, should probably be the one that is paying for access to that insurance information, right? Nobody's ever thought about that way, but it makes a ton of sense. It's a service essentially that we provide our policyholders to issue these, right? Which everybody does. And, it's part of being in the insurance industry.
Cost of commercial business.
Yep. 100%. And, but it's unique in that now we can use a tool that makes that process way easier on us, and not even from an efficiency perspective, which it does. But I think the bigger thing is what you hit on there, the client experience, making that process simple for your client, for then who they're doing work for, or who they're sending the cert to, making sure that process is simple and easy. They can verify the coverage very simply, that they can get started on work, they can get paid, whatever it is. And that whole system now works more cohesively, right? And that's where I think it's so unique in the magic and how you structured that is. So
I appreciate that. And one thing I want to clarify, because it comes up in most conversations, is if you're an agency and you're issuing your certificates through Certificial, if those cert holders are not utilizing Certificial for compliant management services, they're just looking for a COI, there is no charge to that certificate holder either. That is all free end to end, because we don't charge for the delivery of a COI.
Yeah.
But our fees come in is when a cert holder optionally decides to join Certificial and utilize the compliance management capabilities of the platform, either on or directly on our system or through one of our partner channels. And when they do so, that's when they become an actual paying customer. And why would they do that? Because ultimately, if you are a traditional certificate holder and you're in receipt of a PDF, a whole nother process starts for you at that point, right? You got to take that PDF and do something with it. And by the way, it's static information. If you log into Certificial, because of the integration, because of the extension into the management systems, you're actually having access to the data that was used to create the PDF, not looking at data and taking it off the PDF. That completely takes that process inside out. So we're firm believers, the more COIs that get sent out, the more cert holders realize that they can actually have access to the data that was used to create the form rather than scraping it off. They'll join the platform. And when that actual transition occurs and they join the system is when we monetize. So we have a lot of skin in the game. And it's very important for us, and we don't, and also that model is very important because we cannot introduce any additional friction into the process flow. If you're an agent and you got COIs and now the cert holder needs to go even create an account in Certificial to download the PDF, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, again, we know our industry, we know this process flow. We're not going to introduce unnecessary friction, but the benefit and the value is there. And we're firm believers that once people are educated on that value and they realize what they have access to, why would you do it any other way?
Yeah. 100%.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just to kind of get a little bit into the agent broker side of the house, right? The automation is where we bring the real value to them. So, I think that's an important thing to kind of touch on, is that when agents issue COIs through Certificial, it's everything that happens after the COI that also has tremendous value to them. Because what we're actually doing, I don't know if you guys are familiar with our branding, but we talk about smart COIs. And what makes a COI smart, right? It's the fact that it's actually automatically versioned out and automatically updated without the need for any manual intervention.
Which,
That's
by
the
the way, is an idea that's like 50. I'm glad you built it, but it's shit.
right.
It's like 15 years late, right? You're like,
Oh
how
yeah.
does this
Well,
not
like,
existed for like
yeah.
ever?
Well,
But
like
keep
Brian
going,
said,
'cause-
it's timing, right?
yeah.
You're right though. It should have been done 15 years ago. I couldn't agree more.
There's been more ideas that have failed because of timing in our industry than like ideas that have been successful, just with
Yeah.
how archaic our mindset is.
But and it's a lot of what we're talking about too. It's also the model, how you implement it, who pays for it, how do you get it into use and practice. I mean, all of these things make or break, these solutions. They're not bad ideas. They're just, difficult to implement and difficult to get traction at times.
Mm-hmm.
But that concept of, hey, something's changed in the management system, whether it's even a cancellation, a limit change, a renewal, you name it, we have the ability to take this data in, and we have the ability to then update information, and then you'll know that the most current COI is always on file, matching that data at any moment in time. We version out all the COIs. That's what makes a smart COI. That makes this process dynamic and valuable. It's not once and done. If you're getting a delivery, fine, maybe one day of insurance verification is enough. Most of the customers we work with have people on job sites year round. Construction companies, they need to monitor insurance 3 and 5 years after the job's completed. You know what I mean? Like, these are things that, are very difficult to accomplish with static information. And it's that automation that we bring that really, saves the agent broker a tremendous amount of time.
Totally.
So how do you go acquire new clients, Peter? What's your client
That's
acquisition
actually a
strategy?
good question. So the other thing about our branding, if you notice, is we refer to ourselves as a network. And the reason we do that is because of the bi-directional and what we kind of call like the pendulum swinging aspect of our system. So, depending on what side of the house you want to start you want to lift the pendulum and start swinging it, right? It works both ways though. And so let's just say we go to the insurance industry. If you're an agent or broker and you're issuing all your COIs on Certificial, even if one of those certificate holders decide to join our platform, maybe you issued 1,000 COIs, one of them goes, hey, this is cool, I'm going to try this out. What are they going to do? They're not going to just monitor one COI. They're actually going to make a request for all their suppliers. So next thing you know, 200, 300 requests, because they work with 300 suppliers, go out the other way, right? 300 agents get introduced to Certificial and go, oh, what is this? I can respond to this request. And by the way, this is a free platform. You can issue all your COIs. So if we get a few agents joining that way, back and forth we go. And, and so we didn't actually start swinging from the insurance industry as much as I would have wanted to, but needing some level of funding and some because of the business model, we actually did start by introducing on the requester side and going out that way. And we had thousands of agents, create accounts in the first few months. It's not the best introduction to the insurance industry. So if you received a request from us, I urge you to allow us to reintroduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Because
Start the email with, what the hell is this? Yeah.
Exactly. Because otherwise, when it comes from that way, it just kind of feels like, oh, another one of these damn vendor management systems actually do something, but, and if it's just swinging that way, then it is, right? But the reality is that's not what it's about, It's really built for our industry and to help, right? And that takes sometimes, when the pendulum swings from the insurance industry, you can really feel that. But nonetheless, it's a bi-directional platform. And we are now at a point where we are acquiring, to answer your question, on both sides of the house just by that going back and forth and those requests being sent and back. And we're just converting really what are warm leads coming from either direction.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty sweet little system.
It's complex. I'll tell you, I knew what I was getting into was hard. And every day I'm reminded that it's actually more than I thought.
Yeah.
Well, and you can tell that you've spent time refining how you communicate about what you do too. So if somebody doesn't know what the hell you do, I can imagine that it's pretty complex. Yeah.
And you're right. That's been one of our largest marketing struggles. How do I explain Certificial without having to do a 45-minute PowerPoint? At the end of it, they go, oh, wow, that's cool. I get it. Prior to that, apparently it does not achieved on our website or somewhere. Got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Well, but it is. I mean, it's you're disrupting, to use that term, which I actually prefer a lot of times not to use. You're optimizing, you're innovating on an old process that does need to occur, and you're not replacing the process by any means. You're just improving how it gets done.
Absolutely.
And yes, that can be complex to explain the inner workings, but at the end of the day, once people understand that you're doing the same thing, you're just doing it in a much more seamless manner, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those assumed things, but we should probably stay. I mean, all of this in the U.S. is built on Accord form, so we're
Yeah.
licensed by Accord. That's how the Smart COI gets generated. So you're right. At the end of the day, that asset is exactly what it is today, but it's the whole process and it's what's happening and how it stays up to date. That's the differentiating factor. And if anything's being disrupted, it's the communication mechanisms that are really making this process inefficient. Email, fax, because physical mail. I mean, I hate to say that these things are still being used, but you guys know as well as I do.
Oh yeah.
It's
For sure.
heavily in use, which is crazy. Never mind just a paper driven. I'm talking about a pure paper driven process. I have agencies that we work with. They say they do folding parties on the weekends at renewals to get COIs out the door still, and I'm like,
What?
exactly,
Wow.
exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. That's not an old conversation.
If you're one of those people, please reach out to Peter and talk to him about Certificial.
Or us, and we'll buy you at a pretty low EBITDA margin, I would assume. So you got to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of into the model that you ended up with by understanding where the problem originated, if you will. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, everything that the one thing I think we're proud of is that we haven't changed our model. We haven't changed our approach or anything from the day we launched. Like we went into this with everything we just talked about kind of at the forefront, which we haven't had to re-architect. We haven't had to change our approach or anything. That's we kind of looked at this and said, there's only one way to get this done in our minds.
So do you see other opportunities in the risk management space to start the conversation at the end user or requester?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is, really quite honestly, on either side of Certificial, you're going to find management systems. That's why we brand ourselves as a network. I mean, it's in many cases, we envision ourselves, being what Swift is to banking. And so, yeah, I mean, we're really trying to empower everybody on either side of the process flow. So yeah, there's endless opportunity there,
Well, and that's, we talk about this quite a bit, but in the financial services sector, whether it's, banking or investment management, et cetera, new regs get passed down based upon events that happen, right? Like you get 9/11 happens and you get a new reg. 08/09 happens, you get a new reg. Like what? There's not one event. It's not like you have a cataclysmic fire and all the buildings burned down, so we got to change the way that we operate in the insurance world. It's just been the same forever. So like on the heels of that, I freaking lost my train of thought through what I was saying there.
Occasionally has a stroke, Peter.
I glitched out.
We're in the simulation.
No, I mean, like, so I guess there's no change that comes from these certain events, and it takes, the only way that I can see change, like dramatic change happening, is by starting it from the end user, like you're doing it. You need companies, you need the population going back to their agents and their carriers saying, I want to operate in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is happening. And there's a lot of valuable information that we're now being able to obtain because have a greater level of transparency between the insurance industry and the risk management community. There is information that is able to be shared now that really should have always been, but isn't maybe always the case. I'll just give some examples of that. I mean, the way we've structured our stuff, like all the insurance requirements that are buried in MSA contracts right now, Like we don't have any of that data inside the insurance industry, at least not in structured data format where we can do anything useful with. A big part of what we do here as Certificial is making that available to the agents. And and it's detailed, right? It's very granular. It's if you can ask for it in a COI, you can ask for it in insurance. It's a requirement that we have in structured format. And what that's allowing is to really look at a few different things. The process flows, because we're working with both sides. I mean, going back to my Accord days, so like we're creating another layer of standardization too. Helping people understand what's actually a line of business versus a coverage in some cases, and because these COIs get filled out with ways because that's how the cert holder wants to see it, not actually what it is in insurance. And so we're helping iron out a lot of that kind of stuff. But the data piece is the more exciting part. Because we are at a point, where we're working with some really cool data and analytics and helping insurance agencies look at their customers and say, are they actually have enough insurance based on the agreements that they've signed with their customers? And or if they were to make a change to that insurance, how would that affect their current compliance status? So you're literally taking the detailed information that lives in all these compliance vendor management systems right now and putting that at the forefront into the agency management system as a cross-sell, upsell, or just better way of retaining and providing customer service. That's just one way in which this process starts to create ways in which we can spend less time, folding COIs and putting them in the mail, and more time creating, value-added services that really, empower the independent agent channel to say, yes, that's why I work with an independent agent. Because I'm never going to get this level of insight and analytics into all of these things and know that I am actually protected as an insured, never mind just a cert holder, knowing that I have insurance for them,
Totally. So I just want to make sure I understand this. I'm following you correctly here.
Sure.
And because I'm stuck on what you said a couple minutes ago. So you're taking the insurance requirements in the contracts from the requester, the cert holder. So they have a contract with a general contractor who's our client or whatever. You're having them put that into Certificial and say, you're going to send this contract, but then we only have to look in Certificial to understand what's the insurance requirements in that contract that, we got to make sure our client, or actually Certificial does it, but, make sure that they're in compliance with. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's exactly accurate. We work with all of our requesting companies, and we've got complex workflows. Like we have organizations that when they do, again, depending on the view you look at this through, everybody gets a different name. So, you may work with a company that says, I got a supplier enrollment, right? But clearly we say supplier, we're referring to the insured or the policyholder. Mm-hmm. But in their supplier enrollment processes, they'll answer certain questions, and based on that, it builds out the insurance requirements and creates the request for insurance. So in many cases, we can even get very customized. Whereas, well, you're on site, so that means we're now going to add in crime, and based on your location, you're going to need a limit of X, versus you're not on site, so we don't need to ask for crime. Like we've got all this built out, and that's how we're able to get to that structured, level with the insurance requirements, because it's designed that way.
Well, because one of the things that we end up dealing with is you have to have somebody on your team that your client's going to send the contract and say, hey, am I in compliance? You got to have somebody review that, and not every contract's the same. And it just takes time to dig through that.
Yes. So we we eliminate that for our partner network. And then we actually, you mentioned at the forefront of our call, and we were kind of doing like some intros, AI, right? So, built AI. So again, because we always support for on and off network transaction. So on network transactions, this is done out of the box. Off network transactions, we actually have a tool we built for AI to actually extract the insurance requirements out of those contracts you're referring to. So that, we don't have to wait for every last transaction to go through Certificial in order to know we are able to store all the insurance requirements for a given client.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's huge from an because that also decreases E&O.
Oh yeah,
massively, and just the efficiency. Like I said, I mean, it takes you get a standard
reviewing the contracts.
Yeah, you get a standard insurance or a standard contract in, and those are pretty easy if they're truly just the basics. Right. You can get through those pretty quick. But you start to get some that have slightly different wording. they've added in a couple things that you don't know if it really applies or not. It just takes, you got to have experience. You got to go through a lot of those to really understand them, which takes tenure on your team or a lot of training. And that's just difficult for independent agents to do. We battle it. I know. I mean, you almost think like, I got to find somebody with 20 years experience in the industry to be able to help me through these, because they need that.
Yeah. We were looking at some contracts yesterday that we were running some extraction services on, and staring at a sentence for 10 minutes, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem with some of these, it's training the tools and working with it. It's not easy. It is complex, but there's all different mechanisms and checkpoints in place, and also ways to flag things so that, if it does require human intervention, it's not a problem. But if it's on 20% versus 80%, then it's still a tremendous savings, and in the end, you can tweak something and then get it so that you do have all those insurance requirements there, And hopefully we get those cert holders to join the network, and we don't have to get any more MSAs from them. They'll come through the way that, the current requesting channel does today. So yeah, there's a lot there, but you touched on E&O, which I wouldn't mind building off of if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because one of the other things that we're doing here that, again, I don't think people see the COI process, but they forget about all these other touch points. They forget about, oh yeah, it takes you 45 minutes to read an MSA before you can even start the process of issuing a COI.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
MSA, by the way, is Master Services Agreement, just for anybody out there that doesn't know. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. That's another thing that our industry is riddled with, is acronyms that we think. And so, on the think about schedules for a second, right? So, even managing schedules, I see what agents and brokers are doing, having email spreadsheets out, and are you still working with this cert holder? Do you still have this equipment? You know what I mean? All this other stuff, right? And then, all this stuff is manual. Like, we've actually have this built into our system where insureds can actually help manage schedules, have access to all this information. We can then get that, they can mark it for deletion. We can get it back into the management systems. The management systems will then communicate to Certificial and say, hey, by the way, that piece of equipment right there is on 25 of the 100 certs that were issued. Let's get it out of there. And automatically go back to the smart COI. We just versioned out 25 COIs to remove a piece of equipment that was once evidence on there, to make sure, because it's now marked for deletion, we get it out of there. So even scheduled management, I mean, there's a whole life cycle to this stuff that creates manual work that's very disjointed and disconnected today, because it's being done on spreadsheets, it's being done in inefficient ways, but it's also introducing and growing that E&O exposure, because we don't have a great way of constantly updating it, and that's just one more example of the automation aspect that we've built out.
Oh, 100%. It hits so many different areas that I think agencies typically struggle with, that, kind of to your point there, don't necessarily think about either. Yeah. Where it's the extra time you have to spend doing this, because it's Susie that usually does that, and we don't really know what Susie does all day. She just gets a lot of stuff done. So, we'll keep letting Susie do what she's doing. And you don't realize that Susie's spending half of her day trying to figure out these contracts to send certificates out or whatever. Yeah. And then, all the ancillary impacts. That's pretty cool. That's way more than I realized you guys were doing.
Yeah, and we just have an endless, backlog, because the cool thing is we get to work with agencies like whether it's having conversations with guys like you, or just working with different brokers, and although there's the 80% consistency, there's definitely 20, that's always unique, and you'll learn something by speaking to all these agents and brokers, and so there's just endless new ideas of, well, if we could do this, it would really help with scheduled endorsements. And if we could do this, right? It's like, there's so many like little tentacles and legs to this process outside of the COI that, that we need to think about the totality of, in order to really truly say we're actually really efficient in this end-to-end process flow. Otherwise we leave these things out and we keep exposure, open in that particular case, or we just keep a manual step of the process that still makes it feel, there's a lot of effort and work that needs to go into it.
Absolutely. Okay, so if anybody out there wants to learn more about Certificial, who can they get a hold of? How do they get a hold of you, or what's the process they can do there?
Yeah, so I would say always just hit the website, www.certificial.com. There's an about us, a contact us, They're always welcome to reach out to me, but there's email addresses up there that for sales or for info and signing up for newsletters or whatever the case may be. So definitely urge you to take a look, especially to the agent broker community. If you're looking for self-servicing for your clients, if you're just looking to improve your own operational efficiency inside the organization, make the agency more leaner, but more importantly, digital and modern. These tools are available. They're available for free. There's no reason not to leverage them, Yeah. So yeah, hopefully we're raising some eyebrows and some folks will join the network and help. Really, honestly, the way I look at it is anyone who joins the network, you're helping innovate in the insurance industry. You're helping transform us from this paper-driven, industry that we're seen by many on the outside. And so, solving that problem and being able to innovate at the same time is kind of a win-win.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's awesome, dude. And so everybody check out Certificial. We're running a pilot, I know, right about now with Peter and his team. It's been pretty awesome. So we're excited about where we can take that. And yeah, reach out, learn more. I think it's pretty awesome what you guys are doing. So thanks for coming on today, Peter.
Yeah, listen, can't thank you enough for having me. Appreciate that. And hopefully we'll do a follow-up one in the future.
I'd love to, man. Love to.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Nice to meet you, Peter. Appreciate your time.
Likewise.
See you guys.